I need to take a deep breath. Hi guys. It just got really quiet in my house, so I got nervous. Hi guys, long time no see. I missed talking to you guys about books so much, and I know it's only been it's been a minute. It's been over a month. As you can see, I have this new little microphone which will hopefully make the audio of my videos way better. I'm a very soft spoken person 95% of the time, so hopefully this helps. Anywho, today is going to be a long video, I'm anticipating, because this is going to be my August reading wrap up and my September reading wrap up sandwiched into one video, because if you saw, I didn't upload a August wrap up video because I was sick and I had a lot going on during that month. So unfortunately I wasn't able to film because I lost my voice and didn't really have the time. But better late than never. I'm excited to show you all the books I read in August and September. So hopefully no one's annoyed by me holding this. It is what it is. And honestly, I think it's really fun, having this little thing. I'm nervous. I read 5 books in August and 5 in September, so we're gonna go over the August reads first, obviously. Here are all the books I read in August. I got this cute little notebook to keep track of things. So yes, I have notes because honestly, since I read these over a month ago, I honestly might not remember a lot of what these books were about. So bear with me. So folks, what? I literally never say that. This is the first book I read in August, Daisy Hates The Great Undoing. 4th book in the Magnolia Park / Daisy Hates world. It doesn't really follow Daisy that much. I feel like this book followed more of her brother and his relationship with Magnolia, which is kind of I know a lot of people were disappointed because of that, because this is supposed to kind of follow Daisy more, but you did get a lot of perspective from Daisy's brother again, which you do get in the first book of this group of people. But yeah, it was more of Julian's perspective and his relationship with Magnolia, and then obviously you still get Daisy and Christian and their relationship, and they're trying to figure their stuff out. They're not really together in much of this book, but I don't really want to say too much because if you haven't read the series, I don't want to spoil anything, but there are a lot of love triangles in this book between Julian and Magnolia, and then as well as Christian and Daisy. This book is kind of high stakes because there was kind of more violence in this book. It's still following that group of rich British friends, and Julian, the brother, is in a gang and he steals art for a living, so you get a lot of that high stakes in that aspect. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, and I know a lot of people are kind of upset because, like I said, it doesn't really give a lot of Daisy and Christian's story. It's more of Julian and Magnolia. Regardless of that, I still enjoyed it. I do really like this series and all the characters and all the plot, and it's not for everyone. You either love or hate this series, and I'm loving it. I'm really excited to see where it will go. I honestly don't know when the next book comes out, but it's not out yet, and I will be patiently waiting, even though I'm not patient at all. That's all I'm gonna say about that book. It's kind of hard to get into when you don't want to spoil majority of the series, since it is the 4th book. Next we have The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. This is a reread for me. I've talked about her so much, but basically I plan on rereading all of her books. I reread this one. I picked this one up because she's redoing all her covers because I believe she signed to a new publisher. So this is the original cover. As you can see, there is a football helmet on the cover of this one. There's also one right here. Anyways, I picked this up because obviously I wanted to have the new cover because I do really like this book, and then also it has exclusive bonus content, which I did appreciate. I want to say I read this in 2020 during the pandemic, or maybe in 2021. Anywho, I literally love all her books, and I had the urge to reread this, and it gave me the excuse to buy the new copy, so that's what I did. This is a workplace romance. It follows a football player and his assistant, Vanessa. She's basically been his assistant for, I think, like the past 3 years, but she finally decides that she doesn't want to work for him anymore because he's honestly a terrible boss. He's like kind of ungrateful, and he doesn't really acknowledge her existence, and he's really cold and like grumpy. She saves up her money. She's been working with him for a couple of years, and she decides, you know what, I'm gonna pursue my career in like graphic design and art, because she's basically an artist. Hold on. Not me missing my mouth. Oh my god, no way I just spilled this all over my fucking carpet. Fuck. So she saves up her money from working with him for a couple of years. She finally quits. He shows up at her doorstep and basically begs for her to come back. Feels like he can't survive without her. And also he needs to find someone to marry because his visa is basically expiring, or something along those lines. Or maybe it has something to do with his football, like him working in the US in NFL. Basically, he asks her to marry him out of convenience, and like he says that he'll like pay her debt off and all these things, and she's like, honestly, I'm not really into that. But she thinks about it, and then slowly but surely she agrees. Now that I'm thinking about this sounds kind of like wild for him to come back to her and like beg her to continue to work for him and like marry him out of convenience when she was literally like miserable, but she ends up doing it. And then he kind of like changes after that. He starts like appreciating her more and like realizes that he treated her shitty. She's doing him a huge favor, so he best be acting nice, cause like what the fuck. Anyway, so this is a workplace romance technically. I mean, she no longer works for him actually when she decides to marry him out of convenience. She just has to live with him. She's like, I'll do that, but I won't work for you again. And he's like, whatever, fine. She has to live in his house with him, so it's not sketchy, so like people don't question the marriage. And then forced proximity, obviously, because she's living in his home. And then also it's a slow burn, of course, because what would a Mariana Zapata book be if it wasn't a slow burn? I loved it. Again, I've read this before, so I like knew what I was getting into. But yes, I do recommend this book, especially if you're into slow burn. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in August was The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this author. She is the author of Fourth Wing, which is like her biggest book and one of the biggest books that's going around right now. It's a fantasy romance. This is actually my 3rd book I've ever read by this author. And I can say that I've loved every book I've ever read from her. And it follows Beckett and Ella. Ella's brother and Beckett are both in the military, and they're best friends. And Beckett is he like secludes himself from everyone. It's really hard for him to make friends and talk with people. Ella's brother is basically his only friend, and they've been friends for years because, like I said, they've been in the military together for years. And what is her brother? I don't know her brother's name, but basically he realizes that Beckett could use a pen pal, and he's like, I have a sister and she also needs someone that she could talk to because she's a single mom and they don't really have family, and he's like, she could really use someone to talk to as well. So he convinces them to write letters back and forth to each other. They slowly form a relationship with each other through these letters. As you're like reading the present time, you're like reading the letters they sent to each other in the past. Basically, the brother, his name's Ryan, he asks Beckett to take care of his sister and her kids and be there for her if something ever happens to him. But Beckett doesn't want to tell Ella who he is because, I don't know, he thinks it would be complicated. So she forms this relationship with him through the letters, right? But when he shows up to be there for her, basically he doesn't tell her who he is. And it's kind of shitty at first. Like, I was really annoyed by that because I don't know why he couldn't just be honest. Did make the story more interesting though, so I understand why she did that for the plot. So yeah, this is single parent trope military romance, which is what I feel like Rebecca Yarros is known for. Like, her other book I read was a military romance, and then also Fourth Wing is like a war college, but it's fantasy. Anyways, brother's best friend trope. This book is heartbreaking and so well written. I gave this book 5 stars, and I do not give out 5 stars easily. This book made me cry, which, as I said before, like, I've said this in my other videos, it's kind of hard for me to cry when I'm reading a book, but it happened. Maybe it had to do with me PMSing, but it happened. Do what you will with that information. Really good book. I highly recommend it. Now, the next book I read in August is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. So this is like her most well-known book. This book is so hyped up. I had such high expectations of it. I have read one of her other books before, which is one of her adult romance books, The Love Wager. I absolutely love that book. I gave it 5 stars. I don't know if I can say the same thing about this book. A lot of people love this book, think it's 5 stars. This is a YA romance, and it follows 2 kids in high school. We have Liz and Wes. They're basically neighbors. They've known each other their whole lives. They've gone to the same school their whole lives, but they've never really been friends. This boy comes back to town, and he used to go to school with them, but he moved away. But he comes back, and it's, I don't know if it's their senior year or their junior year or what, but Liz has had the biggest crush on him like forever, and he's finally back, and she's like, now it's my time to shoot my shot, but I have no idea how to do that. So Wes and her basically come up with a pact that he's gonna help her win him over, go to prom with Michael and like date Michael, try to help her out with that, and the opposite happens and they start having feelings for each other instead. This is a YA romance, so it was extremely easy to read and digest, but I just didn't really feel super connected to the characters, and like, since it's so like hyped up, I think my expectations were way higher than they should have been. So this is a fake dating trope, love triangle trope, and then he falls first and friends to lovers. All really good tropes. I gave this 3 stars. So 3 stars for me is like, I think it's a good book. It's not something that I'm like gonna think about all the time, but I'm still gonna recommend it to people if they like those tropes. So that's what I thought about this book. Next book we have is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. And unfortunately I do not have my copy because I actually lent it out to my coworker. I had the little cover though. This is a really popular book on TikTok right now. I've never heard of this author until now. This is a fantasy book with a pretty big subplot of romance. So this book follows 18-year-old Iris, and she lives in this small town. Life at home is not great. Her brother, who she was super close to, went to go fight in the war because there's basically different gods within this book. It's a fantasy book. There's a war between these 2 different gods, and her brother had to go and fight in the front lines or whatever. So she is going through it, and she's a journalist. She works for a really big newspaper. She decides to write letters to her brother, thinking that he's receiving them, but he's actually not receiving them. Her typewriter is like magical, and it's sending her letters to this boy, Roman. It's sending the letters to him, and he's also a writer, and he works at the same company as her. So they're kind of like rivals because they both work at the same company and are writing stories on the same things, and then they're both like trying to get the same job position or promotion, but she doesn't know they're being delivered to someone that's not her brother because he confesses to it in a letter. He keeps it from her for a little bit. She no longer wants to work for the paper, and she just wants to go find her brother, so she tries to do that, and he follows her there. Say the romance forms. Before that, it forms while they're writing letters to each other. Some of the tropes within this book is rival journalists, heavy subplot of romance, high stakes because there's a war happening. There's higher powers, like I said, there's gods within this world, and I wouldn't say it's super high stakes. I was definitely entertained, and I'm not a fantasy reader. This is like probably my 2nd fantasy I've ever read, but if there is a subplot of romance within a fantasy, I've learned that I usually will really enjoy it. So I really enjoyed this book, and it ended off on a cliffhanger, which is really fucked up, and I need the next book immediately. This is a sweet romance book, and I just really loved the romance within this book. I don't know, it was just really good, done really well, and I also enjoyed the fantasy aspect, which I'm surprised about. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. So If you've been hearing about this book for a while and you haven't thought about reading it, here's your sign. We only have one more book for August, and the last book I read in August was Heartless by Elsie Silver, which is the second book in the Chestnut Spring series. Everyone talks about this series, so I'm not gonna explain that much, but I'm gonna be honest, I did not like this book. This follows Cade, and he's the brother to the guy from the first book and the girl from the first book's best friend and the boy from the first book's brother. Does that make sense? Her name is Willa. She comes to this small town to visit her friend, and her best friend is married to this guy. He's a bull rider. This is from the first book in the series. This is the second book. This is the second book in the series. So it's kind of like so all of these are standalones. They're all intertwined within the same world. Anyways, basically, she comes to visit her best friend in this town, and her best friend's married to this guy, and he has a brother. And they're like, my brother needs someone to help him with his kid because he's a single parent and he works a lot. And you have time to help out because she doesn't have like a job. I think she like is taking a break. Yeah, she's like taking a break from work, and they basically convince her to be the babysitter for Cade. Single parent tro, small town. There is a really big age gap. Well, not really big, but I think it's like 25 to 39 or something like that. Grumpy Sunshine, he's pretty like grumpy. She's pretty sunshine. Anyway, she babysits his son, and she ends up living in the house with him because it's just the easiest scenario because she's taking care of the kid. So she lives in a room in his house for this like month or so, helping take care of his kid, and forced proximity and slowly but surely a romance forms. I didn't really enjoy this book. I felt like their initial spark and stuff was very like physical, and I didn't really enjoy that. I felt like, I don't know, I just didn't enjoy their dynamic. I gave this book 2.5 stars. So sorry. Honestly, I think I might continue to read this little series though, because I heard the fourth one is really good. We shall see. But yeah, I didn't really like this. Okay, now we're at September, so hopefully I do a better job of explaining these because these are more fresh in my mind. We're gonna start off with The Last Song. This is the first book I read in September. I feel like I read this a long time ago, or maybe I like started some of it but I never finished it. I'm sure a lot of you recognize this. This is a Nicholas Sparks book. They made this into a movie in, I want to say like 2013, 2014. I absolutely adore this movie. I rewatch it all the time. And I just really had the urge to reread the book. Like I said before, I don't know if I've read this before like completely, but I really had the urge to read it. So this follows a girl named Ronnie, and her little brother get sent to their dad's summer home for the summer because her parents are divorced and her father wants to spend time with them. So she is kind of like rebellious and doesn't want anything to do with her father because they had a falling out because of the divorce. So she's kind of like in a sticky situation because she's spending the whole summer with him and she really doesn't want to. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this movie, so I don't want to explain too much, but it's basically about her relationship with her father. That's like a big part of the story, but there's also a big subplot of romance. She meets this guy, lives in the beach town, and his name is Will, and they form a relationship together. They're very like polar opposites. His family is super rich. His family dynamic is like pretty fine, whereas hers isn't. So they're kind of like polar opposites, but they do fall for each other. So it's really just like about relationships and like coming of age story. I will say I did not enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed the movie, which I feel like is not typical, but that's the case with this. I felt like there was a lot of stuff in this book that like wasn't needed. You actually got perspective from like every single character almost, which was, so you got perspective from Will, which I did like. You got perspective from the dad. You got perspective from Ronnie, obviously. You also got perspective from Blaze, which is this girl she meets and they become friends kind of, and then this other guy named Marcus, which he's like the antagonist. Hate him for real. Did not like his perspective. It was kind of stupid. I didn't really enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed the movie. Regardless, I'm glad I finally read it. Another thing I didn't like about this book is that strong religious aspect to it, especially when you are in the dad's point of view. General tropes in this book are coming of age, following Ronnie and the relationship she has with different people in her life, grief that she deals with in this book. That's like a huge part of the book. I don't think I'll ever read this again, but I definitely will continue to watch the movie. The book did make me cry because the movie always makes me cry, and I was like picturing the movie in my head, so like I think that's why it triggered me. But yeah, I gave this 3.5 stars. It's alright. It's pretty good for what it is. There's some stuff that I feel like that didn't need to be included in the book. Okay. Now I need a round of applause for me for finishing this fucking book. Next, I read Binding 13. Woo. This book is hefty. It's almost 600 pages, and the font on this book, like the pages are pretty big. The font, so tiny. I feel like it's more than your average 570 page book. Wow, where do I even begin? This book follows a girl named Shannon. Shannon is in high school. I believe she's 16 or something. Does that make her a junior? This book takes place in Ireland, so like the years for schooling is different and stuff like that. Pretty sure she's like a junior. She transfers to a new school because she's bullied like terribly at her current school, so her parents send her to a private school. Her life at home is really bad. Her relationship with her dad is terrible. Please look up the trigger warnings before you decide to read this, if you do. So yes, it follows her, and she, on her first day at this new school, she gets like knocked out because she runs onto the field, like, and I don't remember what sport. Is it rugby? She gets hit in the head. Okay, I shouldn't laugh, but like, it's not on purpose. She accidentally gets hit in the head, and the guy that hits her in the head, he's like a senior or something. He's like 2 years older than her. He accidentally hits her in the head and knocks her out, so he's responsible for her and like has to take her to the office, etc. They kind of get off on a weird foot, but they slowly form a relationship. She's the new girl. He's super popular. They're kind of like hush hush about their little like friendship going on because she doesn't want to get bullied and like make a bad name for herself at the school because she's trying to start over. And Johnny like knows a lot about her past because he actually read her file, so he's kind of wants to look out for her and protect her. So that was sweet. Their relationship was really sweet. This book is extremely character driven. It literally just follows her like every day at school and her everyday life. There isn't like a huge plot. It's really character driven, which is not for everyone, and it could be hard to read at times because like some of it felt kind of repetitive. This is kind of like a sports romance. The sport he plays is a huge part of his life and his character. Some of the tropes within this book is first love, relationships and friendships are a big part of this book. Another trope is he falls first, so if you like that, there you go. Yeah, like I said, look up the trigger warnings before you look into this if you end up doing it. I thought this book was okay. It was just a lot. Like I felt like it didn't have to be as long as it was. It was surprisingly really easy to read, I feel, and it like flowed really well, but at the same time I'm just like,
why is there so many words?
So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Like I said, a rating like that is pretty like decent in my eyes. If I give a book that rating, I think it's like good for what it is. I'd recommend it to people if they like those tropes and stuff like that, but I'm not gonna think about it a lot, and like I don't know if I'm gonna continue to read the series, to be honest. But I'm proud of myself for finally reading this because it's so daunting. The next book I read is When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I read her other book called Practice Makes Perfect, which technically you're supposed to read this book before that book, but it honestly doesn't matter because they're both standalones. They just have like characters from this book bleed into that book. So like the Practice Make Perfect book, it follows this girl named Annie, and her brother is in this book. So this is like your typical fluffy, light-hearted romance, really fast-paced, easy to get through. Follows a girl named Amelia. She's a famous singer, and a guy named Noah. He lives in this small town and he owns a pie shop. Amelia finds herself in his front yard in the middle of the night, and her car's broken down because she decides she needs a break from the fame. So she wants to like take a little trip, and her car breaks down in his front yard, and they get off on the wrong foot. She thinks he's a murderer. Valid. She ends up staying with him. Forced proximity. One of us is famous trope. She's famous. Small town. Like I said, this was super fast-paced, easy to read. I think my like expectations were really high because a lot of people love this book, but I thought it was just okay. It's okay for what it is. I feel like it's a good palate cleanser if you're like in a slump and you just want something that's like easy and lighthearted and fast-paced and a good romance, I'd recommend this. Also, this does not take place in Rome. It takes place in Rome, Kentucky, which I feel like is disappointing to a lot of people, but it says that like in the first paragraph on the bow. It takes place in a small town in Kentucky. And yeah, their relationship forms because she stays with him for a couple weeks trying to get away from fame and stuff, and obviously they form a relationship, but he's like really doesn't want to be in a relationship because she's famous and like that's really complicated, and he lives in a small town and he's just not in the right place. But you'll have to see what happens by reading it. But that's all I have to say about that book. I rated that book 3.5 stars. The next book I read is What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. This is a nonfiction book edited by Michelle Philgott. There are 15 essays in here. One of them is written by the editor, and then there's 14 other ones that are written by various people. So basically, these 15 essays in this nonfiction book are about people's relationships with their mother. It's a pretty like wide variety of stories. They all come back to like relationships with their mother. There are really big topics covered in these essays, like abuse, coming of age. Even though it's like short, it's a pretty heavy read. Like, I would look up trigger warnings if you're interested in this. It was interesting to read about people's different relationships with their mother. Like, we have a relationship with someone's mother who's deaf. One of the writers speaks about who her mother was before she was her mother. Someone has a mother that is a psychotherapist. Yeah, this was very raw, very honest, painful, eye-opening. I thought it was pretty good. I don't really like nonfiction usually, so like this isn't my favorite genre, but I did like think this book was pretty decent. I rated it 3 stars. And now for the grand finale. The last book I read in September was Normal People by Sally Rooney, and this was a reread for me, and oh boy, just twist the knife. She really twists the knife. A lot of people overhate this book. Let me start off by saying that. I read this book before. I've also watched the show twice. I have so much to say. In short, I truly love these characters so much. Like, they feel like real people to me. This follows Marianne and Connell. They go to high school together. Connell is like pretty popular. Marianne is not. Connell's mother actually is a cleaning lady for Marianne's family in her house. Her family is rich, so they do see each other outside of school because of that. They both have like a thing for each other, kind of. It takes them a while to acknowledge it because they're different classes. They're very opposite. So it basically follows their relationship with one another. This book is very character driven. There is not a huge plot. You're basically following them throughout like years. Like, I would say like at least 6 years, I want to say, goes by throughout this whole book, and it's a very tiny book. This is really easy to read. It was fast-paced, and I was really like enthralled in the story. There's a huge miscommunication trope between the two of these characters, which can kind of drive some people insane, but it's just super realistic in my opinion. Hence, Normal People. It's ironic that that's the title. Both these characters have a lot going on within themselves, like mentally. It's like kind of coming of age between the two of them, and like follows them from high school to college, and kind of their relationship with one another and how they always find themselves coming back to each other, whether that's a friendship or romantic, second chance romance, I guess, because they do like go in and out of being in a romantic relationship. Check the trigger warnings if you're gonna look into this book. I just really love these characters, and I think like watching the show really made me feel for the characters and like feel more connected to the characters. The show is just done so well, and I love the actors that were casted for that show. And I was just like picturing the show in my head, and I just love while I was reading it, and I just really enjoy this book. This is a 5-star read for me, and I highly recommend it. Those are all the books I read in August and September. Thank you for being patient with me, and sorry for the delay, but I hope to film a books I want to read in fall next, I believe, because I just ordered a couple books. If not, I want to post more TikToks posting book content, because it's just like easier to upload and stuff, and like I have more ideas for that because it's like short form videos. So if you want to follow my TikTok, this is my TikTok. I'm gonna try to post more book content on there. I don't know when I'll see you next. Hopefully it's before my next reading wrap up, because I need to step up my game. I know a lot of people don't watch these videos, but if you do watch these videos, I really appreciate it, especially if you watch them all the way through, because I know I can ramble and not make sense a lot. I really do enjoy talking about books, and if you enjoy watching these, that makes me feel so happy, and I hope you find books that you want to read from watching these videos. So this book is just I just can't stop thinking about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. There's one more thing I want to talk about. So I have like a new hobby, and that has been making bookmarks inspired by some of my favorite books. And I made one inspired by Happy Place, one inspired by Divine Rivals, which I talked about in this video, and then one inspired by Magnolia Parks. I literally just spilled water all over my Happy Place one, so that's lovely. I have more. These are the bookmarks I made that I'm selling on my small business, and they are inspired by Happy Place by Emily Henry, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I hope you like these. If you're interested in them, they're on my Depop at Shop Knotted Cherries. I just had a really fun time making these, and I hope to make more based on other books that I enjoy. But yeah, I just thought I'd show them here because why not? Yeah, if you like them, I'll link my Depop in the description. As I said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this audio sounds better, and I hope you enjoy this video. I will see you in my next video.